Welcome to Academic Vocabulary Crash Course Lesson number 2. As we said in lesson number 1, the point of this series is to look at some academic vocabulary words that we are going to be asked to engage with, maybe on a test, maybe in a reading book, maybe by a teacher. When we hear these words, we need to know what we're actually being asked to do. Well, just like in lesson 1, we introduced 6 words, but we used it in relationship to an actual passage. In lesson number 1, we looked at how 6 different terms we engaged with a passage about recycling. In lesson number 2, we're going to look at how 6 new terms can be used to engage with this passage, how weathering changes rocks. Weathering is the process by which natural forces slowly change and break down rocks over time. After years of wind and rain, a large boulder may show many cracks and even have pieces falling off. Scientists study the boulder to evaluate how much the rock has weathered over time. They notice that water can seep into small cracks, freeze during the winter, and expand, which makes the rocks break apart over time. This process helps explain why weathering happens gradually. Wind, water, and temperature changes all work together to wear down the rock, eventually making it smoother and changing its shape. In one part of a park, scientists observed that rocks near a river erode much faster than rocks far away from water. This observation supports the idea that water is a strong force in weathering. Nearby, in the rocky area of the park, one rock with deep grooves and rough patches is an example of weathered rock that scientists can easily identify. By looking closely at these differences, scientists classify weathering into 2 main types: mechanical weathering, which breaks rocks into smaller pieces, and chemical weathering, which changes the rock's minerals. Together, these processes help us understand how the Earth's surface is shaped and changed over time. So the first word we want to look at is evaluate. When you're asked to evaluate, they want you to judge or determine the significance, worth, or quality of something. A question may look like this. Based on the paragraph, how would you evaluate the effect of weathering on the boulder? Well, in our paragraph, we saw that after years of wind and rain, a large boulder has many cracks and pieces falling off. Scientists study the boulder to evaluate how much it is weathered over time. So, how would you evaluate the effect of weathering on that? From that piece of text, we would say, I would evaluate that weathering has greatly affected the boulder because the many cracks and falling pieces show it slowly breaking down. So we judged and determined how weathering affects the boulder. And of course, we use that word evaluate in our answer. We want to use that question to start our answer off. Next, you may be asked to explain. When asked to explain, they want you to make something clear by describing it in more detail or revealing important facts, which means you have to find them. Your question may say, how does the paragraph explain the process of weathering in rocks? In the text, it said water enters small cracks in rocks, freezes during winter, and expands. This process makes the rocks break apart over time. So can you explain it based on that sentence? You could say, the paragraph explains that water freezing in the cracks makes the rocks break apart slowly. And of course, that explains the process of weathering in rocks, or at least part of it. Next, you may be asked to describe. When asked to describe, they want you to give a detailed account or picture of a situation, event, or process. You may be asked, can you describe what happens to rocks during weathering according to the paragraph? In the passage we saw, it said that weathering is a slow process where wind, water, and temperature changes gradually break down the rocks. Over time, the rocks become smoother and change shape. That tells us what happens during the process. So we could answer it this way. Rocks are slowly broken down by water, wind, and temperature changes, and they become smoother and change shape over time. So we're taking what they said and we're putting it in our own words. We don't want to just copy. Next, we're going to support. When asked to support, they want you to back up with details or provide evidence for a point. Now, where would you find details or evidence? In the text. So go back in and look for it. The question, what evidence does the paragraph provide to support the idea that water causes weathering? So I went back in the text and I found this. Scientists noticed that rocks near the river erode much faster than rocks far away from water. This observation supports the idea that water is a strong force in weathering. So, does that prove that water does that? Of course, we have evidence now. And we can say the paragraph supports the idea by showing that rocks near the river wear away faster than rocks that are not near water. That is evidence. Next, we're being asked to identify. When asked to identify, they want you to recognize and name someone or something. You may be asked, can you identify one feature of weathered rock mentioned in the paragraph? Again, in the passage it said, in the rocky area of the park, one rock shows deep grooves and rough patches. This rock is an example of weathered rock. Does that tell us a feature of weathered rock? Can we identify it? Of course we can. We might say, I can identify that the rock with deep grooves and rough patches is weathered. In our last term for this crash course lesson, classify. When asked to classify, they want you to arrange or organize by classes or put things into groups. You may be asked, based on the paragraph, how do scientists classify weathering? Well, again, in the text, scientists classify weathering into two types, mechanical weathering and chemical weathering, which changes the rock's minerals. This helps them study how rocks change over time. Let me read that again. Scientists classify weathering into two types, mechanical weathering, which breaks rocks apart, and chemical weathering, which changes the rock's minerals. This helps them study how rocks change over time. Did you notice what I did there? I noticed something didn't seem right, and I reread it. You should do that too. So, does that help us classify? Of course it does. Scientists classify weathering into mechanical and chemical types, depending on whether the rock is broken apart or its minerals are changed. That is the last term for this lesson. Lesson number 3 is coming soon. Keep your eyes out. And of course, make sure you know what to do when they ask you different types of questions.